My name is Bernice Weiner. Today is March 3rd, 1994. I am here to interview Joseph Litt, who is a survivor of the Nazi Holocaust. I'm doing this under the auspices of the Holocaust Documentation and Education Center, Incorporated. The purpose of this interview is to add to the oral history of the Holocaust, so that through this living memorial, future generations will know what happened. With this knowledge, we hope to prevent any such occurrence in the future. Joseph, let me welcome you. I want to thank you for coming today. I'd like you to state your full name, please.
My name is Joseph Litt.
Where did you grow up?
In Warsaw, Poland.
Approximately how many people were in Warsaw at the time that you lived there?
And Poland was about 380,000 people, Jewish people.
And in Warsaw?
And in Warsaw was 380,000 Jewish people.
And what was the total population?
About, I would say, we were 30% of the population of Warsaw.
Were the livings that people earned there diversified, or were the Jewish people in any particular line of work?
No, not they diversified. There were tailors, shoemakers, jewelry people, business people, doctors, lawyers.
Let us talk about your family and the town you lived in during those early years. How many children were in your immediate family?
I had 4 brothers and 1 sister, and my mother and father, of course.
What were the names of your brothers and sisters?
Okay, my oldest brother was Moshe. The second woman was Yitzchok, then Favel, Shulem, and my sister Leah, and of course myself.
And what were your parents' names?
Shlomo and Esther.
And what was your mother's maiden name?
Lipkin.
Joseph, would you show us on the camera, please? Tell us the names of the people as the photographs come up on the camera.
Okay, this is my mother and father. My father's name was Shlomo, and my mother was Esther.
And the next picture, please.
This is my oldest brother, Moshe, and his wife.
And the next picture, please.
This is my brother, Yitzchak.
And the next one.
This is my brother, Favel, and his wife. This is my brother, Sholem.
And
this is my sister, Leah. And that's me.
how old were you in that picture?
About 15 years old.
How did your parents earn their living, Joseph?
My father worked in a store as a salesman.
How far were you able to go in school before the war interrupted?
Well, not too far, because I went to Hebrew school. Maybe I finished at the 6th grade. I had to go to work. My father couldn't provide for the family, so we had to go out and work in order to have a roof over our head. And that's why I went to work for my brother, Yitzchok. He was a fourier, so I learned the trade.
And how old were you?
At that time, I was about 13 years old.
Do you remember any incidents of anti-Semitism that occurred in your town, to either your family or to your friends?
Well, anti-Semitism, it was it was rampant actually, you know, because I lived not too far from the Vistula.
Which
in
was?
Warsaw.
In Warsaw.
In Warsaw. And we wanted in summertime as kids, we wanted to go swimming. And we had to go through Christian neighborhoods. And we lived in a Jewish neighborhood. Our neighborhood was strictly, it was like an open ghetto, but it was strictly Jewish people. And a lot of kids used to throw stones and call names, you know. And this is what I experienced, and not only I, but my friends, a lot of people, you know. But since we were secured living in the neighborhood, as long as I was in the neighborhood, and nobody did anything to us. But we moved out of the neighborhood and going to the different neighborhood where non-Jews lived, we had problems.
What was your life like right before the start of the war?
Well, I belonged to an organization. We had activities. I played soccer. For a while I was boxing. I broke my nose here. Somebody broke it to me. Well, I was going to the movies. We went to theater. We went to the opera. Also, we had Saturday mornings. We had Philharmonic hours, you know, and so we went to see that. And then we meet. Sometimes we had little parties, you know. And then we talked about different things. We as grown-up youngsters, we always were very interested in politics. When we took the paper, we had to read the first page and see what's going on, you know. And this is the way I was growing up, you know, with friends, and we had a good time at that time when I was growing up. Even though you know, a lot of times I went hungry to bed, but this doesn't matter. But we had a good family, concerned family.
How early did you hear about what was going on in Germany?
We heard this in 1933, actually.
And do you remember what you first heard in 1933?
And in 1933, we heard because there was a soccer game in Poland between Germany and Poland, you know. And they came to us in our neighborhood with a horse and buggy at that time, you know, like you have it in Park Avenue, Central Park, you know, something like this here. I don't know, we call it in Poland droshka, but I don't know in English how you say it. So anyway, they came into our neighborhood and they were very obnoxious, Germans, and they started yelling, you know, like Poland belongs to them already, you know. And we read in the papers that what's going on in Germany with Hitler and all that, that they tried to take over the government, and we were interested in that, but we never thought that we're going to have a war between Poland and Germany.
So the Germans were actually in your area of the town as early as 1933?
Yeah, I would say 1933, maybe 1934, but that year.
Now, were these German soldiers or?
No, civil. They weren't civil. If they belonged to the government, I don't know, but they were civil. Now,
did they try to say anything to the population, or?
No, not at my, no.
They were just very visible?
Visible.
And
a few of them, only maybe 3 or 4 of them, you know.
And how did you get your information about what was going on in Germany during those years?
Through the press. I read the Jewish press, I read the Polish press, and we couldn't live without the paper.
As the years progressed towards the onset of the war, what were you hearing about and what changes were going on around you?
Actually, not till 1939. You know, no changes were going around us. The family was doing the way we always did, you know, and we didn't feel anything, you know, different than we did when the war broke out. Actually, you know, we didn't hear too much about what's going on. In Poland was the same, you know, like it was always, you know, and like I said, the only news we had is through the paper and radio.
And what were you hearing in 1939 about what was going on in Germany?
At that time we knew it's very bad. But you see, what happened is Chamberlain from England went to Germany. He made a pact with Hitler to give it to Sudeten. And we thought this is going to be the end of it because he said, if you give me this part of Sudeten, you know, Czechoslovakia, the corridor, then everything's going to be okay. But it was not okay. And we didn't know that what they had in mind, you know, what they're going to take over Poland, you know. After a while, maybe months later, they invaded Poland. And then what happened, September the 1st, and I remember at that time my mother and father were home because my mother had in a little town called Girardot. She went to visit because it was like summer yet, you know. And she went to visit with my father for a few days. And we was, when they came in with the papers yelling, you know, the war was on with Germany. So I was home, my sister, my brother, and we were scared that my mother and father wouldn't be able to come back from that little town because they tried to mobilize the soldiers. So, but 3 days later, my mother and father showed up, and they came back to Warsaw.
Now, during that 3-day period, what happened in your town, in your area of Warsaw?
Well, the war broke out, and we had bombardments. You know, the Messerschmitt was over our heads. Poland didn't have any defense. Very little. They were staying with the horse and buggies in the courts, you know, and shooting with a rifle to shut down airplanes. I mean, this was there was no defense. And a few days later, only I think 8 days or whatever, they took Poland, and they marched into Warsaw. Now, when they marched in, we saw right away we're going to have problems, because people were staying in line to buy bread. And right away the Germans came around and asked, who's a Jude? Who's a Jew? And some of our citizens, Polish citizens, showed, he is a Jude. They showed, they point with their finger, who's a Jew, who's not a Jew. And right away we had problems, you know, we knew that something is going to happen to us.
Right. Let's go back for a moment. Now, you said your parents were in a town away from the house.
Yeah, Girardot, yeah.
How were they able to, did they have difficulty getting back to you?
The first, when they mobilized, the first day or two they had troubles, but the third day they came back by train. It wasn't too, anyway, it wasn't too far from Warsaw. So it wasn't, you know, so they came by train back home to Warsaw.
Now, when they returned home, was there any talk on your family's part about thinking of leaving?
Oh. When my parents came back, at that time was no talk about leaving. My father was not a youngster anymore. You can imagine that my brother was the oldest, was born in 1907, you know. So he wasn't too young here, you know. And there was no, we didn't talk about leaving. This was later on.
Right. Now, did you try to make any plans when you saw what was going on? Did the family speak of anything that they would plan to do as a family?
See, in 1939, when the broke out and Hitler came into Warsaw, we were free people to walk. There was no ghetto yet. Little by little, they start giving orders what they're going to do with us, you know. And at that time, I was going to work yet. My brother still had some fur to finish, and the stores were open, even though we were afraid to walk out the street sometimes because they used to go around with trucks and catch you to go to work. You know, in fact, they caught me once, and I had to work in the Gestapo, Alea Schucha 14, for the whole day. My mother didn't know what happened to me, you know. But they were riding around and catching young people for them to work, you know. And we saw it's not the way it should be like it was before, but it started getting tighter and tighter till.
So basically, at first, things continued on as the way they always have.
It was normal, of course. But we still could move, we still could buy, if you had the money, you could buy bread. You still could do, you know, some trades, you know. The Polish people brought in bread and meat and everything. If you have, like, of course, like anything else, if you had the money, you bought it. If you haven't got the money, you didn't buy it. But you could survive at that time.
What were the first changes that you saw occurring?
The first changes, you see, material was starting getting, first of all, the Gestapo started organizing people to show who has what in the house, or business people. They went to the stores, they took everything out. Let's say there was a street geisha, it was all with materials, you know, for suits, dresses, and everything. It was really one of the nicest streets, and it was very prosperous. And they came with trucks that took out everything else. And same thing with the foreigners, they took out the fur and everything else. So then it started getting less and less. You didn't have the material to work with. So then became hunger, you see. And the people who were, let's say, before the war, were well-to-do, they spent their money till they didn't have any. They didn't have anything to eat. And the rich people suffered more than the ones who I used to go to bed without sometimes with food. Like you take me. You see, there wasn't one many times that I was hungry during the day also. And I didn't have something to eat till my father came back and brought some money. But otherwise, the other people, the rich people, for them, when the money, they didn't have any, then they had a big problem, you know. And then you saw on the streets, dead people lay in the streets, covered with papers.
This was a while later.
Later, yes, right. I'm talking about the end already, the end, closer to 1940 already.
Right, let's go back. After these first restrictions where the Gestapo went into the store, and what kind of laws did they post that would be changes in your lifestyle?
Okay. First of all, they had laws to all the Jews who own fur to bring it to a certain place. Jewelry, gold, anything, you know, what they can use, you had to report it and bring it to them. So this goes to show you that a little bit they took away everything from you, that you didn't have any means to continue living, because if you haven't got the money, you cannot buy anything, and nobody's going to sell it to you.
If someone resisted this and fought them on it, what happened?
If somebody resisted, there was no resistance because you got shot. You get shot on the spot.
And they took what they...
And they took whatever they want. And everybody had the right to kill a Jew.
So they called for all the material things first.
All the material. Little by little, they put in these restrictions more and more, and they choke you up, finally.
And what were some of these restrictions?
Like I just said, first of all, you lost your jobs. You couldn't go to work because there was no material to produce. So you had to live from day to day. So you went out. So then they called you to work. So you work on different places for the day, and sometimes you got a little piece of bread, or maybe they don't even give you that, but you had to put in a full day's work. And it was terrible. It was bad. I mean, first of all, in the winter time, it came to the winter. We didn't have any coal to heat the apartment, and it was cold, and it was miserable. People got sick. They had typhus.
This was in the winter of '39.
39. You know, they start, sicknesses, and people died from hunger, and then they start catching people to work outside Warsaw, the outskirts of Warsaw.
How did your family manage during this time?
We managed. We were lucky because I, as a young boy, I organized. I got in contact with Polish people, you know. I did things that if they would call me, I wouldn't sit here and talk to you.
What were some of the things that you did?
Brought in some flour from the other side, from the Polish side, bread, sometimes some meat. And
how were you able to negotiate?
And we trade for goods, for shirts, you know, for coats, whatever you had home. You had my father had a clock on the wall. We sold that. And this way, I brought in some food, you know, like barley, flour, and we made a lot of water and very little of barley. But we ate. We all, you know, were hungry, and well, we all eat. But this is the way we continue living. I mean, it was terrible. But one thing, in my family, nobody died from hunger. And nobody died, you know, because tomorrow will have whatever they had, we managed, and we managed to get it.
What about your older brothers and sisters who had already left home?
Well, my brother, he had a shop, the oldest brother, Moshe, he had a shop. He had 10 people employed. He was a tailor. And he had some material, you know, because he made, I remember it was when the war broke out, it was summertime, and he made coats for, it was something, a novelty for the rain. You know, it was like a robot thing, you know, very light, and he produced that, you know, and he bought some material, a lot of it, and he had money also because he was very well-to-do. So he kept us going. Then we moved over to my oldest brother, my mother, my father, and myself, and my sister, my brother. And like I said before, we had a close-knit family. If one ate, everybody was eating, you know, whatever was left. I mean.
What happened from this point on?
Okay, this was 1939. Now we're going to 1940.
The winter of 1940?
In 1940. They had signs in the street, they're going to open up shops in the ghetto. They didn't think about the ghetto yet, but they're going to open up shops. So there was one manufacturer, his name was Schulz, a German from Leipzig. He was a fourier before the war. He wanted for the German effort to make jackets for the Air Force, which I did work on that. Also shoemakers to make the boots because it was when they sent the soldiers over to Russia, it was very cold, so they had boots from fur, you know. And with my brother, he had to submit the machine. My brother, the tailor, had to submit all the 4 machines, and there was another factory by the name Tebens. And he went there with my brother Schulen, you know, and I and my father, my mother, my sister, and the fourier, we went to work for Schulz as fouriers. Now, my mother was not a fourier, but he found some work because my brother submitted the machines, so he had a little bit. He talked to the owner and everything else. Everything was fine. They find a job for her, so she was doing handwork, you know, by hand. She was sewing. And my sister was also, before the war, she was sewing fur, you know, as this was her trade. And I worked as a machinist, and my brother worked as a cutter. And we continued going to work every day, and the good thing about it was that we got a paper showing that we work for this outfit, for Schulz. So in case they were in the streets, they were catching people to go to work, and you show the Ausweis, they call it, not the paper, and they show that you work for Schulz, they let you go to work, because it was for their benefit, because they need the coats and whatever we used to do for them. And we continue working, and then...
How was life during that time? Were you able to get enough food to eat?
Enough was never enough, but never enough.
To sustain
we used to get, you know, rations, you know, and very, very little.
And what about your house? Were you able to heat it at this point?
At that time, we moved from the street that where I was born, and I was there till 1939. We moved on a different street, the same street where the factory was. At that time, we have lived on the first floor, one room, kitchen, and a foyer. My mother went every day to work. Whatever we got from the rations, that's what we ate. But we were together. And this continued till about, then now I'm going to go to 1940, because this continued 39 and 40. In 40, they closed the ghetto, November of 1940, they closed the ghetto.
And how did that come about?
It came about, they start making plans how they're going to close the ghetto. So the street that I used to live is next to a church. So they cut it off, and the windows from the Aryan side were facing the Jewish side. And the plans, when they finished with it, so everybody was in one group, but different streets. I lived at that time of Novolipki, where the shop was, and my brother lived in a different street that I couldn't go out from the ghetto to see him if I want to see him. There had to be another way how to see him, only through if they send out from our ghetto, let's say, some people to work on the Prosta Street where my oldest brother was. Then I could join that group and go in to see my brother. But this thing, I didn't do that because I continued staying with my brother. But I want to tell you what happened before. I had a cousin, my father's brother's son. He came to my father because the Russians took a part of Poland. This was the pact they made with Hitler. He came to my father. My uncle died before the war. He came. He said to my father, "Why don't you pack everything, and I'll take you over the borders," because he knew how, and you're going to be on the Russian side, so you're going to be safe, because at that time we knew it's going to be terrible with us. My father said, he looked around the house, he says, "What I'm going to do? Where I'm going to go?" You know.
About when was this?
This was before closing of the ghetto, in 1940, because November they closed the ghetto, but this was before. But we didn't realize that there are going to be crematoriums and death camps and all this here. We thought maybe it's going to pass, you know, and maybe things will get better. So my father says no. And then he looked at me, my other brother, Shulem, he says, why don't you take the two guys, you know? Take Joe and Shulem. And at the moment, I accept that. And he says, you know what, I'll have to leave, my cousin. Tomorrow, 5 o'clock in the morning, we had to go out early morning in order to do that. So he says, I'll pick him up. So my mother started collecting, you know, the underwear, whatever we have to take with us, and she had a big piece of luggage. It was like made from wood, you know, I don't know, we had it at that time. And every piece of...
Take your time.
Every piece of shirt, underwear, whatever she put in, I saw that. I saw she's crying. She cried. I talked to my brother. I says, we cannot leave them. What are they going to do without us? Now I have to leave my mother, my brother, and my sister. And like I said, I was wild in the game because I had to risk my life in order to provide a little bit, and my brother did the same thing. I said, I cannot leave, and my brother said the same thing. He said to my mother, stop packing, we're not going. My cousin knocked on the door at 5 o'clock in the morning, says, his name was Ichi, says, we're not going, we're going to stay with our parents. And we stood with our parents, and I'm so... And now, after the war, I was so happy. At least they didn't die from hunger. They were killed, of course, but not from hunger. It was bad.
Now take your time.
And we continued working in the shop. And life was very, very terrible. We had so many things, and they killed so many people without court, without anything, without guilt. Nobody did anything. Nobody stole nothing from nobody. Nobody took anything from anybody. But at random, you know, because he was a Jew, they came in with machine guns, you know, and they shoot you down. And the only thing that my family was saved for a short time is because we worked in the shops. Because there were 3 different ghettos. The wild ghetto, where the uprising was taking place. Then we had Schultz, where I worked, and then they had the Prosta Street, another shop, and there was another small one on the Leshno. But this was all, these neighborhoods used to belong to, I mean, Jewish people lived in those neighborhoods, you know, before the war.
Now, were these other areas smaller, ghettoized areas?
Yes, see, the wild ghetto was the largest.
Right.
But the wild ghetto also went to work. You see, they had groups of people in the morning. They went to ammunition factories. You know, they put them together. But these the ones didn't have the privileges that we have. By privileges, I'm saying that we had a piece of paper. This was the privilege. If somebody stopped me in the street, you know, he could take me with the paper also, and he shut me down. But this was something for protection. It was a piece of paper with a photo, you know, and that's why we also got the cards, you know, for food. In order to get it, you had to go into the store and show it. So this way you get your rations, you know, to eat.
What were the conditions in the ghetto that you lived in during this time?
Conditions were terrible. We didn't have any heating in the winter time. It was terrible in Poland. When the winter comes, it's very, very cold. Lots of snow. You might freeze if you stay too long in the street. And it was terrible. And also, not only that, it's the sickness that got you also, the typhus. Many people died from typhus because there was no medication, there was no hospitals for us, you know, you couldn't go to a hospital. And there was nobody to complain to. And it was very sad. It was very bad.
What happened at this point when the situation got bad in the ghetto? How long did you remain in this ghetto?
Oh, I remained in the ghetto till, well, I went out from the ghetto for a while. I was caught in the street.
What were you doing?
Okay, I'll tell you what I did. a guy, false German. You know a false German? A false German is
Tell me what it is.
a false German is that his grandfather was born in Germany, but his parents lived in Poland, and he lived in Poland. He became a Volksdeutsch. He's not a German in Germany, but he lived in Poland. I got contact with him.